So people were asking that if this is a webinar, so the audience participants cannot be seen. Their video is turned off and also muted.
Okay. However, would they be able to make questions or only some members of the audience?
Yes,
through the chat function.
Yes, through the Q&A. So why don't we get started?
Yes.
Okay, so hello and welcome to our series on racism, discrimination, and othering, perspectives from around the world. I'm Dr. Maria Nardone, Director of Technology and Global Learning at the William Alanson White Institute of Psychoanalysis, Psychiatry, and Psychology in New York. Before I introduce our guest speakers, I would like to thank members of the Institute's administration who have made our series possible. Dr. Elizabeth Krimendahl, Mr. Richard Herman, John Aumann, and Elizabeth Rodman. Thank you. I am also very grateful for the work of the members of my committee. They have created our program, invited our speakers, and will be the moderators for our event. Our members are Max Belkin, Karen Gennaro, Anton Hart, Tom Hennis, Gurmeet Kanwal, Catherine Nordzi, Vladimir Novakovich, Jean Petroselli, Hopeton Shaw, David Solomon, Masato Tsujikawa, and Cleone White. To all of you, thank you. We also welcome our participants from around the globe. We've had many people today and also at our prior events from Russia, Mexico, South Africa, Greece, Japan, Germany, Belarus, Poland, Ukraine, Israel, Vietnam, Romania, and of course, many from the United States. I also want to thank everyone who submitted questions for our speakers. We will try to address as many as possible. Also, during our meeting today, you may add additional questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And as mentioned, participants are not shown on the video and are also muted. So today we're very pleased and very fortunate to have Dr. Juan Mezzich as our speaker. Dr. Mezzich is currently tenured professor of psychiatry at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York. Also, the Hipolito Unanue professor of person-centered medicine at San Marcos National University in Lima, and editor of the International Journal of Personal-Centered Medicine, London. He was president of the World Psychiatric Association and is founding president of the International College of Person-Centered Medicine. Our moderator today, who will also continue with the introduction of Dr. Mezzich, is Vladimir Novakovich. Dr. Novakovich is a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst and a graduate of the William Alanson White Institute. He currently holds a faculty position as assistant professor of psychiatry at the Zucker School of Medicine at Northwell Health. Dr. Novakovich serves as a program chair of the New York chapter of American Association of Psychoanalysis and is an active member of the American and International Psychoanalytic Association. In addition, he is a fellow of the American and of Psychodynamic Psychiatry and Psychoanalysis and the American Psychiatric Association. So without any more from me, I'll turn the program over to my colleague. Thank you, Vlad.
Thank you, Maria. Welcome, everyone. I will continue a little bit with the biography of our speaker today and presenter. Dr. Juan Mezzich was born in Lima, Peru. He is a son of Peruvian and Yugoslav parents and graduated from Cayetano, Heredia, Peruvian University Medical School with a Merck Sharp Dohme Award thesis on depression, syndromic profile and typology. He then completed psychiatric residency and had MSc in academic psychiatry and MA and PhD in mathematical and statistical psychology at Ohio State University. with a dissertation on taxonomy and behavioral science. And that was completed at Stanford, as well as certification by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. He held sequentially professorial positions at Stanford, at the University of Pittsburgh, before moving to New York. Related to his research, he chaired WPA section on classification and diagnostic assessment, and the U.S. National Institute of Mental Health Group on Diagnosis and Culture. He is a well-known cultural psychiatrist. He was also a member of the World Health Organization ICD-10 Mental Disorders Work Group and American Psychiatric Association DSM-4 Task Force, and was a member of the US NIMH Epidemiology Study Group, which is a very known study. He has authored and contributed over 350 scientific journal articles in book chapters, and over 30 books, and has received 7 doctors honoris causa degrees from the universities in the Americas and Europe. So before we start our discussion and conversation with Juan, I'd like to just mention briefly few words in Spanish for our Latin American guests today. En nombre del Instituto William Ellens White, me gustaría dar la bienvenida a todos ustedes y en particular a personas de América Latina y los Andes para que se unan a nosotros para la presentación de hoy de Juan Mezzich, háganos preguntas y disfruten del tiempo que pasamos con nosotros virtualmente. Now, it's my pleasure to host Juan as we explore his presentation and address the questions from the audience. If you are unable to watch us live, you can still participate by viewing the uploaded video on the YouTube by WAWI staff. And I would like to mention that Juan is not only leader of person-centered medicine and internationally acclaimed author, but he has a passion for teaching of person-centered medicine and the culture of people from Andean Cordilleras. Following the enormous tradition and spirituality of the Inca world, so-called children of the sun, in their own tradition, Juan has profound respect for the global community and our global family as well. He's recognized globally and nationally. He has inspired many generations in compassionate and powerful way by bringing his tradition of culture and civilization of the Inca world and their spirituality to a global audience, very often in a way that is perceived as a heart-to-heart communication. He has a natural ability to connect and inspire the like-minded people and professionals. His traditions, stemming from the complex societies of the Andean system of thinking and believing, taught him the ancestral wisdom that he has so successfully integrated with other traditions of our modern times, addressing the global human suffering. Juan has a powerful mind of the broad reach, seeing person as part of the global family and his own family as well. With his presentations, cultures of Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia, Argentina, Northwest, Venezuela, Chile, together with African and Asian diaspora, bring us unbelievable palette of colors. So without further ado, I'm delighted to present a good friend and a colleague for today's talk organized by our institute. Thank you, Juan, and please join us on this brief journey.
Thank you very much, Vlad, and thank you, Maria, for your very generous words. I am delighted to have this opportunity to communicate with you in conversation, as well as with other colleagues and friends from around the world.
Thank you, Juan. I'd like to start by asking you, not only for myself, but for the general public, about Andean civilization values and traditions that are very relevant to your way of thinking and actually living your life. So going back to the ancient Andean civilization, what were some of their prominent values? And can you tell us a little bit about those Andean culture values and traditions?
Thank you very much, Vlad, for your questions. Certainly, now as we're going to discuss some of the present issues that are confronted by life and the pandemic, it is pertinent, I think, to reflect on where the people from Latin America come from. In fact, I'm from a very rich civilization, an Andean civilization, that had values such as that life is to be lived well, never leaving anybody behind. And that at the same time, they were very moralistic in a way in their greetings. Amasua, Amayuya, Amakelia was the way to say, have a good day, and meant that do not lie, do not steal, do not be lazy. But at the end of the conversation, it was tupa nanchis kama, until life give us another opportunity to see each other. And therefore, current people in Latin America are have as ancestry this rich civilization, and has much to teach us, and perhaps we can reflect on some of those aspects further as we talk.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about the concept of buen vivir, or well-being in Spanish, that is also coming from the Inca world?
Yes, the concept of well-being, buen vivir, yin causai in Quechua, has a very strong similarity to the eudaimonia of Aristotle. Mm-hmm. One of the bases of ethical life, and also in other traditions. For example, the Ubuntu from South Africa, for whom an encounter of persons was an end in itself, an opportunity to cultivate our humanity. So the richness of the Andean cosmovision and civilization had very striking parallels in other parts of the world.
What comes to mind right now is Martin Buber's I, thou concept, I and you, that is very similar in many ways to what you're talking about. But I'd like to ask you more about their concept of health in Andean tradition.
Thank you. Yes, concerning Buber, let me mention from the Ubuntus the idea of that I am because you are, I am because you are, and you are because we are. And but I agree with you. It's very striking to consider the concept of health in Andean civilizations. It tended to be a harmonious equilibrium among the internal world, the social world, and the ecological world. And only when all these three worlds were in sync, we could consider ourselves healthy. We perhaps later we can see how relevant this may be to current times.
Mm-hmm. Particular to the climate change and other things that we are facing right now.
Exactly.
Okay, and this seemingly sharing society, not leaving anyone behind, has been interrupted, I guess, by conquistadores and the Spanish conquest and colonization, with people like Francisco Pizarro and Cabeza de Vaca. Can you tell us a little bit, in brief lines, what was the impact of Spanish conquest on the Inca world and Inca Empire?
Yes. In the 1500s, Spaniards, conquistadores, conquerors, came to Latin America and particularly to Peru, because Peru was the center of the world, their world, the Andean world. And they had tremendous impact, both in affecting the existing civilization, in disrupting it, and in creating a system of domination that is to a large extent the basis of the current problems with racism and discrimination and abuse that we can perceive to this day. They brought some positive aspects, such as the Spanish language, the beautiful Spanish language, but at the same time they suppress other languages, such as Quechua and Aymara, beautiful languages and very well structured languages. They say that in order to translate, for example, from Russian to English, sometimes specialists translate first to Aymara and then to the other language, because Aymara has a possibility to structure the translation better. So certainly there was a tremendous impact that lasted 3 centuries. And along with that, a number of challenges and difficulties that currently people experience now could be recognized from that point.
And could you tell us more specifically about the way the oppression is still present? You did mention through the language suppression and language, but how did they address and treat the Serranos or other highlanders of the Inca world?
Right. Well, there was a saying in colonial times that I think is quite revealing in this sense. It says, Serranos nunca buenos, y si buenos, nunca perfectos, y si perfectos, siempre serranos. These highlanders, never good. And if good, never perfect. And if perfect, always highlanders. Mm-hmm. So they, even after the colonial period, after the 3 centuries of such domination from the Spanish royalty, many of these undervalue of Andean people continue to this day. And the Spaniards coming from Spain, Europeans of white skin, some of them of blue eyes, blonde hair, were replaced as the powerful people by the Creoles or Criollos, which tended to be also whitish. And the whiter you were, the more prestigious you were. Additionally, there was a sense of inferiority in it, because if you had just a Spanish last name, it was not as prestigious as having a Northern European name. my name is Croatian, my family name is Croatian. So that gave me a little sense of superiority among some of my friends, to others who may be called Izaguirre, for example, that is my Basque mother's maiden name. This continued perhaps with the new dominant group being the Creoles based in Lima, with often neglect of people in the highlands, neglecting their languages. Very few people speak Quechua. An attempt to try to put Quechua as a second language failed some years ago. And so in this sense, we see a situation similar to Bolivia, which is even more Andean in a way than Peru, because the majority of Bolivians are natives from the Bolivian Andes, who speak many languages, particularly Quechua and Aymara, and who, however, until recently, they had never very clear representation in the government of the country. That is a situation that currently exists. It is not so obvious or official, but certainly is part of culture, part of how things are.
I see. Thank you, Juan. My own search brought me to the well-established fact of the concept and of Indian problem and family planning in Peru of people with higher birth rates, namely indigenous people of the Peruvian descent. And can you tell me about those cases that are known as a clear sign of discrimination?
Yes. In fact, let me put it in broader perspective, a response to your question. One of the most brilliant analysis of Peruvian reality is that by Jose Carlos Mariátegui, called the Amauta, meaning the teacher, who wrote these 7 essays of interpretation of reality in Peru. And in fact, one of them is called the Indian problem. An Indian problem that remains to this date, and which other illustrious academics and analysts of Peruvian reality have examined very well, such as Jose Maria Arguedas, who pointed out that he could speak Spanish and Quechua, that he thought in Christian and in Indian, and that he hoped that one day, free from the chains of egoism, people could live happily all their all their traditions. This remains as a high ideal still to be attained. And I think you are referring probably to some manifestations of the Indian problem.
Yes, by Alberto Fujimori.
Well, it has been documented that there were forced sterilization of Andean women. And this is, I think, a very tragic example of the Indian problem.
Okay, and fast forward now, there are changes in your world, in Bolivia namely, and in Peru. that we talked about earlier with the current political scene. And can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, this is a very interesting moment in Peruvian political life, because a little bit as it happened in Bolivia a few years ago, for the first time, there is a candidate that currently is ahead in the polls from Cajamarca, from the northern highlands of Peru, and who is, as far as I know, the first time that an Highlander, very identified with his roots, his teacher from primary school in the rural Cajamarca, is presenting himself to obtain highest office, and is currently first in the polls. In fact, he won the first round, and now they are trying to determine the final result in the second round, against a very interesting lady who is the daughter of a past president who is not well remembered by everybody as an example of good leadership. And so you see here many stories, interesting stories. One Highlander is running against a descendant of Japanese people, representing very different political perspectives. But probably most interesting to what we are talking about is this, the fact that for the first time, candidate clearly identified with the highlands from the so-called Peru Profundo, the deep Peru, is emerging as the leading candidate for highest office.
Okay, thank you, Juan. Let's touch a little bit the question of discrimination of native and Mestizo population a bit more. I'd like to know how discrimination of native and Mestizo are actually, how is this being done in modern times, in current times? For instance, degree of discrimination, what are the complexities of discrimination, ethnic and socioeconomic factors, political manifestations, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Well, to put this response in perspective, when I was an assistant professor of psychiatry at Stanford University after completing my residency training, I had the opportunity to meet with professors outside the medical school on statistics, where I completed my dissertation, but also to education, a very strong education school at Stanford. And the professors told me something that I still remember, and that is the discrimination in the United States, where it's primarily against Black people. That is not just a yes-no point, but it's a question of degree of skin color. And the discrimination of the darker skinned persons is greater than for those who are lighter skin. The same happens in Peru. Those who have a lighter skin, who are mestizos, they will not be called mestizos properly. They are mestizos anthropologically. That is the main cultural or ethnic group of Latin America, the mestizo culture, composed of many traditions. Of course, European component, but also African component, Asian component, and native original natives. So the skin is one of the elements, the color of the skin, the degree of the skin that very strongly affects this, along with many other factors that interact with ethnicity and these manifestations of ethnicity, such as the skin color, such as socioeconomic status, such as language that you use preferentially, etc. So as we know, these social determinants of health, as we call them now, are many and affect tremendously how the health and the life of people can be affected. And this is happening in Latin America as it is happening all over the world. These are the challenges of our human family, and that is, I think, why so valuable the series that the William Alanson White Institute in New York is now moving forward with to deal with an issue that is a world issue, but that needs to be also examined, cultivated, and addressed locally.
When you're mentioning socioeconomic factors, are you also talking about the rate of poverty in Latin America and in specifically indigenous population?
Yes, well, I remember when I started studying diagnosis, which is my area of academic research, but not diagnosis simply of classifying things. I started that way, but from a statistical viewpoint. But then later I realized, along with the mentors I had, that it was not simple to classify, and that in fact you had to pay attention to many other aspects. And now that is the way now in the classification and diagnosis world we look to the future, namely a more contextualized description of the clinical condition, not just trying to identify a disorder, but the context of the disorder and of the person who is experiencing the condition. And so also relevant here is that the goals of sustainable development of the United Nations is a very powerful instrument to try to address the multiplicity of factors that in an interactive way affect life. And therefore it's a very valuable reference as we move forward in New York or in other parts of the world to improve the lives of our fellow human beings.
Now we're living in the COVID-19 times, and so I was wondering, what is the impact of pandemic on the Latin American indigenous population? Were there discriminant ways of how this population were affected by the pandemics or not? And what are the principal dimensions you find in the current pandemic?
Well, we are in the middle of quite a major challenge to our life and to our existence, as we know. And although in some parts of the world, like in New York and the United States, the situation seems to be improving. At the same time, yesterday, the World Health Organization said that we have to be prepared for even worse episodes in next year. So we're in the middle of a new reality. And it's a reality that the students are examining and distinguishing in it a number of dimensions. Certainly, it's not just respiratory disease as it was formulated initially, but very complex morbid condition involving immunological, circulatory, neurological aspects in addition to the respiratory and viral ones. But additionally to that clinical complexity, we now recognize that it is also an ecological issue. It has been suggested, for example, that the disruption of the Amazon forest, another big forest in the world, may have a role in the disruption of ecological systems that may bring virus out in the open, so to speak, and interact with human beings in ways that did not happen before. So that is, of course, paired with our concerns with climate change and survival of our species. Just a little bit further complicated by its possible interactions with pandemics. But more focusing on the more immediate life of human beings, we recognize again that in addition to a very complex clinical condition, the pandemic involves a very serious challenge to our mental health. Most surveys show that rates of depression have doubled from 25% to 50%. Of anxiety, the second most common mental health condition, doubled from 20% to 40%. So clearly, there is a tremendous impact in our mental health. But of course, health is not isolated, it's part of life. And therefore, we have to recognize a tremendous challenge to many people to continue living. And here, we find also very close relationship to a main topic of this discussion, which is racism and discrimination. Because as we know, all over the world, the groups that are most affected by the pandemic, both in terms of becoming infected as well as in terms of having more severe developments and death, are the vulnerable populations, including those that are vulnerable from an ethnic and from a socioeconomic viewpoint. So this complexity of the pandemic brings in the thinking of many colleagues that we need to look for a better world, so that to take advantage in a way of this crisis, to find better solutions to how we should live better in a more solidarious world, for example. And this issue of solidarity right now, for example, is being played at the level of the vaccines that have been seen as a game changer for dealing with the pandemic, and which unfortunately is not as widely available as it should be. There is no question that in this interconnected world in which we live, unless everybody is safe, nobody is safe. So as it was recently said in the Lancet a week ago, our duty, our ethical duty cannot be fulfilled for us health professionals unless we fight for an economy that takes care of everybody. So we have in front of us the possibilities and the need to have better health systems, but also better economic and social systems to have a life that is worth living.
And that is bringing us more to the your area of expertise and focus, which is person-centered medicine, the term that is actually coined by you many years ago as a response to the dehumanized form of medicine being practiced in the world, and for which achievements you have successfully being recognized in many circles in academia, but also worldwide. So I would like to ask you a little bit about the principles of this person-centered medicine and health. If you can elaborate a little bit on that one.
Thank you very much. I will be very happy to do so. But let me clarify that I was not the coiner of this term. I'm just one of those who are in the more recent, perhaps, movement among perhaps others that are cultivating this person-centered perspective and applying this to health and many other areas of human activity. In fact, we could find antecedents of the person-centered approach in health among the ancient civilizations in Asia, in Greece, in the Andean cultures, where health problems tended to be understood and dealt with in a personalized way. In fact, it is said that even going back to the Neanderthals, there is evidence studied by historians that the crucial aspect of life in Neanderthal times was the care that the group paid to the individual to allow that he could recover from illness. So, but now more recently, of course, now when we are facing this double-edged development of the advance of modern medicine with marvelous discoveries in terms of tissues, organs, genetics, diseases, diagnostics, treatments. But at the same time, there is a recognized dehumanization of care. And in front of this, the voices of very illustrious thinkers have come. We can, for example, remember in this country, Carl Rogers, both an educator and a psychotherapist, also connected to the William Alanson White Institute, by the way, as many others that perhaps we can reflect on because we should. With such precedents in around 2005, at the World Psychiatric Association, we started a movement that we called Psychiatry for the Person. And then a few years later, we explore if the interest in this could be also present among other medical specialties and health institutions. And we are really very pleasantly surprised to see that the World Medical Association, the international, the World International Organizations for Health, World Health Organization, also International Council of Nurses, the International Alliance of Patients Organizations, were very eager to join in this effort. And so since then, since 2008, we have been organizing Geneva conferences on person-centered medicine in collaboration with the World Medical Association, the World Health Organization, and many other that are headquartered around Geneva. We also have been able to find groups in different parts of the world that are interested to cultivate this perspective in a more local way. And one of the most active ones are, in fact, the Latin American group. And they are developing new ideas about how to conceptualize health strategies. The most recent one is person-centered in integral care. Not treatment, but care, a broader term. And new concepts such as self-care and intercare or mutual care also developing as new perspectives to enhance our ability to deal with health problems in a way that may be not only more effective, because for example, for the most common clinical conditions, which are the non-transmissible chronic diseases, you need to change your lifestyle in order to have some chance to be able to move forward with this. That important clinical aspect is so complemented by the fact that when we talk about health, we do not need to restrict. In fact, we should not restrict ourselves to just dealing with a more biomedical aspect of that, but to have a fuller conceptualization of human beings, including, of course, the psychological, social, cultural, spiritual, and even now, probably considering an ecological dimension for health.
Not only the medical model focus, that was
right.
Predominant model. I apologize, I assume Norman Sartorius was also the one with you that coined the term, and other people. Okay, so
well, but
how?
Vlad, perhaps as I was getting a bit carried away with the origins of this perspective in medicine, I didn't address more pointedly your question about what seems to be the main principles of person-centered medicine. And here we could say perhaps the first one is ethics, that care and the relation with each other should be ethically based. Second, to have a broad theoretical framework to understand issues and to deal with them. Biological, psychological, social, again, also ecological and spiritual. And another one is the importance of communication, both in terms of languages and how you interact with people, but also how collaboration at various levels take place. Mm-hmm. So, for example, one of the most interesting new developments in person-centered medicine is to see diagnosis as a collaborative effort to understand what is going on in collaboration of health professionals with the patient and the family. And also addressing therapeutic decisions in a shared manner, shared decision. Mm-hmm. So these are some of the principles that, along with individualized care rather than standardized care, just treating diabetes rather than treating the person who has diabetes. Mm-hmm. And the importance of also at the community level, when we talk about health services and health policies, to do this in collaboration with the community where these services and policies are going to be applied. And finally, mm-hmm. having the key support activities such as education and research also being person-centered, and by being person-centered, being possibly more effective.
Okay, and what would be the fundamental response of your approach, person-centered approach to racism and other forms of discrimination? Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, I think we in our organization, as many groups around the world, are naturally concerned about these issues, serious issues, and that we have been thinking that, in fact, one of the most promising ways to address racism and discrimination may be to promote the persons of the people involved. Because often behind discrimination and abuse is the dehumanization of such people. And this also will have the virtue of not just remaining at the level of protest, as we should, but also to propose solutions that have the promise to be effective, to deal more effectively with racism and discrimination and abuse, and at the same time emerge from such tragedies in a more enhanced manner, in a fuller human perspective.
Okay, and what about the view of a public man versus the public woman in Andean culture, and more importantly, view on chulos and serranos in comparison to others when we talk about, and the third element is feminicide that is quite predominant. Can you tell us a little bit more about those problems?
Yes, one could speak a lot because this is a very interesting topic. And but just remember from what you are saying now that a close friend of mine from Mexico used to illustrate how different men and women were affected by the same term. He told me, in Mexico, if you say he's a public man, that's great. That means he's a statesman, person concerned with the community. But if you say she's a public woman, you mean she's a prostitute. And so how just the same word being influenced by the cultural factors can have very different meanings.
And the feminicide, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
The feminicide, well, this is, of course, an important issue, complex issue that has many sides, many dimensions. But I think one of the more serious issues is the rates of homicides against women. Unfortunately, in general in the world, but particularly in Latin America, among others regions where machismo sometimes is displayed in terms of not only abuse, but killing women and justified on strange ways. And so clearly we need to be aware of this and to have a firm stand against such tragic rates of homicides against women because they are women.
Okay, I'm just minding my time here. And can you tell us a little bit about how the ideas of the historical figures of our institute, like Harry Stakes Sullivan, perhaps even Chandler Ferenczi, has helped you in forming your perspective and your world of ideas?
Thank you very much. I will be happy to say that when you and Dr. Nardone invited me to participate in this very interesting series, I started reflecting a bit more about the William Alanson White Institute in New York and the important role that it has had, not only psychoanalysis, but I would say in the whole mental health field. And I think it's a very powerful influence that I think is just going to grow because it has to grow. And I already mentioned Carl Rogers, who was connected to the William Alanson White Institute, but more pointedly, perhaps one of the main historical figures of the Institute is Harry Stacks Sullivan. And when I was president of the World Psychiatric Association, and I was asked to have a presidential theme for my 3 years period as president, I think the work of Sullivan was quite influential in me. The idea that psychiatry has to be interpersonal. And pretty directly from that came this program that we developed of psychiatry for the person. We put it like that, person, in order to be as broad as possible and to integrate the different aspects of the person, including genetics and other biological factors, so development, psychological issues, social aspects, spiritual aspects, etc. So focus specifically on the person, but at the same time, in our statement of mission that appears in our website, we say that our perspective looks at the person in context, particularly in social context, but you could say even broader, a historical context from the beginning
Cultural.
of that person to the life project that each one of us may have, and that we as health professionals have the responsibility to stimulate in our patients.
So maybe
Okay.
we'll start to take some questions from the audience as well. This has been a fascinating discussion. I'm so happy that you brought up the issue of language and how critical that is to a person's identity, to how they think, to the way they structure the world. And we have a few questions about that. One person said that they are a psychoanalyst in practice for many, many years, but they were also a professor of Spanish in the past for many years. And they used to teach the culture of the countries in which Spanish was spoken. And that the Spaniards had a chart that was divided into 32 categories regarding a person's Spanish heritage. Would you be able to discuss the reasoning behind this chart? I think it's Fala Lepo. And this person also said that they had lived in Belgrade as well.
Yeah, right. Well, it's interesting how this is framed.
Well,
Because, of course, Vladan Novakovic is originally from Serbia. My father was Yugoslavian from the Croatian side. And therefore, all these major languages have also a broader ecumenical framework. I think the complexity of languages that is illustrated by the issue that you mentioned and the question that you formulated is also reflective of the variety of cultures, because language is basically a gate to a way to live the world, to interpret the world. And this is the position of linguists, for example, like Noam Chomsky and others, that put the importance of language at the basis of how we think and how we can interpret the world. And let me mention another table that I am familiar with from colonial times in Peru. There were 32 ethnic groups that they recognized. It started with Spanish and Indian, but then that became complicated with many other influences. And there were some of them, such as tente en el aire, you are in suspense. And another says, I do not understand you. I do not entiendo. They were so complex that they defied a clear interpretation. So I think that when we talk about, for example, dialects, which is one way also of languages take a form of may take, they say that a language is a dialect with an army. So when there is a strong political support from that dialect, then becomes a language. But there are an infinity of modifications, because, as we know, language as culture is a dynamic construct that is continuously evolving, and in that process, it changes forms and associations with other similar concepts.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the impact of the indigenous people and oppressing their language, we started this series with to be able to compare and to hear from other cultures and compare how discrimination and oppression and racism is expressed in different countries and different cultures. And we know that in Canada, for example, the Indigenous people suffered oppression of their language. And as a result, people were depressed and even suicidal. And do you have similar documentation or similar data of the impact of oppressing the language in South America?
Well, language is a hallmark of how you interpret life. So as I mentioned before, when Vlad asked me about how this discrimination played out and what were the factors that were involved, is usually a plural aspect. It's a plural concern, a plural tragedy that has many factors there: ethnicity, language, socioeconomic status, skin color, etc. And all that leads to a world in which people do not deal with other human beings at the same level. But one group diminishes another one, demonizes the other one, undervalues the other one, decreases the human quality of the other in order then to feel justified subconsciously or consciously to ignore them or even to abuse them or even to kill them. So these very tenuous factors, cultural factors, at some points can have very drastic and lethal consequences.
Okay, we have another request. Could you please repeat the name of the author of the Amoato? I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly.
The author of
the Amoata?
Alma, Alma, I don't know if perhaps the question refers to Alma Ata.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure I mentioned Alma Ata, but I should have had, because in 1978, there was a major conference organized by the World Health Organization in Alma-Ata, Kazakhstan, at that time the Soviet Union. It was the first global discussion about health policies. And what came from Alma-Ata was this idea that in order to improve health, you have to take care of each other, basically, mutual care for each other, which, however, was not interpreted as such and was interfered by some interpretations that interfere with the fulfillment of that very powerful agenda. So only recently in 2018, there was another major conference in Astana, and which confirmed the aspirations of Alma-Ata of 40 years before, and commit itself to continue working to that goal. And I mentioned that, in fact, in the Latin American group, our colleagues there cultivating person-centered medicine in interaction with the Pan American Health Organization, which is the office of the WHO for the Americas, are discussing new ways of to interpret the fundamental strategies to improve health. And these concepts of mutuality, of intercare, are emerging as a very powerful and promising perspectives.
Okay. Well, could you provide us with an example of intercare and mutual care and how we may put this into practice in medicine and in psychoanalysis?
Yes.
Small request.
Well, in fact, recently we had a conference only last month in the Geneva Conference on Person-Centered Medicine was on self-care and well-being. However, the declaration that has emerged from that event, the Geneva Declaration of 2021, now it's labeled self-care, intercare, and well-being, because intercare was for the first time discussed there. And when we talk with some of the main scholars for that, to give us a definition of that, they were hard-pressed to do so, because it is although there are precedents of that in Alma Ata, but it had not been elaborated until very recently. So there is still not a good definition of intercare, but roughly it refers to mutual care, to taking care of each other. And I think this is can be applied to how we can improve our health ourselves, assuming responsibility for health, so that therefore health is not only a right, but a duty as well, a universal duty. Because there's no way other to advance if we do not take responsibility for our health, in addition to the government and social institutions providing the structures that can facilitate proper health care. Now, how to do this? I think that I would tend to say that the William and Lansdowne White Institute is in a particularly promising status to be able to cultivate this and to bring this to psychoanalysis at large and to mental health more broadly, because of the concern with subjectivity, with the deeper aspects of the mind, of human life, and at the same time paying attention to the social aspects. So I think that, I would hope that your colleagues, Dr. Nardone at the William and Lansdowne Institute, White Institute, would be interested to explore these the new perspectives and to bring their perspectives and recommendations to all of us.
We're almost every one of our series, people have asked, what can an individual do to promote change that can broaden out to a community-wide context? In a way, I mean, you're definitely telling us what we at the Institute need to do, but did you have any recommendations for individuals?
Well, I can remember now that you are asking this question, what Martin Luther King said, no, you start change by making change within yourself first, because that will make sure you understand what you are talking about, and you can be more authentically make recommendations to others. No? But for example, the issue of burnout. In the past, it was considered initially the burnout was just, as we know, it's an epidemic all around the world. Now, where particularly health professionals are affected by this syndrome that can be lethal in some cases. Yes. And initially, the idea was, well, how we can deal with burnout, so that to try to minimize the chance that we can be burned out. Now, how we should strengthen ourselves. But then more recently, we realized that in addition to that, we had to look at the system, because the system often has a very deleterious and negative aspects on the individual. Sometimes considers the individual just a cog in a wheel. And in such a system that is dehumanized and abusive, is not enough to be strong and resilient. No? So I think we need to improve ourselves individually. And I think therefore health professionals, as we deal with our patients, the people who look for our advice, we can help them with strengthening themselves. But also, I think we need to look at what society and health systems and educational systems can do to minimize their abusing the individuals in the system, or looking at them as only little elements that are dispensable.
Okay. So this question came in English and in Spanish. I would need Vlad to read it in Spanish, but I now have an English translation, which is, could you please comment on the quote, "We, the Peruvians, idealize European royal families, but have nostalgia for the Inca. We are stuck between the two."
Well, it's an interesting comment. I was not familiar with that. But of course, no, we can, there's a parallel, right, in the United States, where there is such a tremendous interest to follow the British royalty as if it was the most important thing in the world. Every little detail of that seems to be of high interest every day. Well, I think that the same could be said perhaps among the natives or the people in general in Peru when they look at the Spaniards. In the past, it was called the mother country. I remember when I was a student in Peru, people were told talk about the mother country, and people were familiar with the Spanish anthem, for example, which is a beautiful anthem musically. And so they were in love with that tradition. Now, very few people speak of Spain as a mother country. And in fact, now there is a much more nuanced and even in some cases antagonistic view about Spain in order to affirm oneself the enormous value of the native cultures, which again are continuously evolving. To just say that the culture of Peru is that the Inca culture would be a disservice, because we are much more than that now, and we have to be aware of our complex reality and to respond to that effectively.
Okay. I think I've run out of questions. Vlad, did you have some more?
Not really. I think Juan covered a lot of material and gave us a lot of ideas for the future. Juan, do you have anything that you would like to mention?
Yes, well, as I had mentioned at some points during this conversation, I really look forward to the opportunity of seeing how the William Ashton White Institute can contribute to the humanization of healthcare and of society more broadly. And in this regard, I think perhaps we can mention Sandor Ferenczi, another historical figure of the Institute, for whom the mutuality of the interaction was fundamental. And this distinguished him, and I think to some extent it distinguishes the Institute in New York, the possibilities of understanding ourselves by understanding that we are part of a dialogue and of a larger world, and that in fact our ethical responsibilities cannot be fulfilled until the life and prosperity of everybody is considered. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for this opportunity to contribute.
I guess, I think you've touched on this. There is one more here about what are some of the racial stereotyping dynamics affecting individuals whose perceived racial appearance is strikingly discordant with stereotypical attributions regarding their socioeconomic status. So while this person is particularly interested in the Peruvian experiences, an example from a different country is that of, at the time, an Afro-Brazilian female mayor of Rio de Janeiro, who on one occasion was greeted in English upon entering a five-star hotel in that city, where the greeter assumed she must be from the United States. This person's particularly curious about the extremes, not only affecting perhaps a very native American-looking person with high socioeconomic status, but also a very European-looking individual living in extreme poverty.
Right. Well, I think this is a very interesting example that you mentioned, and which illustrates the interaction of several factors here. I remember when I was starting to study psychiatry in the United States and at Ohio State University, and then with colleagues from Yale, such as John Strauss. John, who was one of the founders of the multi-axial approach, namely to diagnose clinical conditions, not just by identifying the disorder, but the context. He pointed out that according to his research and his reading of the literature, the most powerful variable affecting health was socioeconomic status. In fact, right now, others say that more important than your genetic code is your zip code, where you live. But along with this well understood importance of socioeconomic status, I think there are many other factors that are emerging that need to be pointedly considered, such as ethnicity, language, and all what is behind that. Namely, all of this process that through dehumanization, through demonization of the other, we have come to be the subjects of derision and neglect and abuse. And this is what right now we are experiencing in the United States, but in many other parts of the world as well. And I think that will bring us to the fact that we have to be, when we talk about being a good patriot, a good citizen, we can remember the words of Hernandez, the author of Martín Fierro, who said, "It is not patriot he who does not love his compatriots." Mm-hmm. And I would say, particularly those compatriots who are more vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And I think that would be the hallmark of a good society, as it has been said, that it takes good care of its more vulnerable people, from a socioeconomic, from an ethnic, from an age viewpoint, like children, old age persons. So our ethical commitment to equity needs to be fulfilled, particularly by paying attention to vulnerable groups that, through, again, the process of demonization as sub-values, have become justified in the eyes of those who of us who may neglect them as deserving type of that type of abuse. And I think that if, to the extent that we recognize that this is not simply that we are not nice or we are not educated enough, but there are these factors of dehumanization at the root often of this neglect, we may not be able to advance effectively in the process of having a better society.
Mm-hmm. We have time for, I think, another question here. Can you tell us about psychoanalysis in Peru? Are you have any information about that?
Well, psychoanalysis has a very variable course, as we know, around the world. There was a time when it was the major theory and science of mental health and of psychiatry. That time is not here anymore, but still is cultivated in many parts of the world. I would say in Latin America, particularly in Argentina, is well known for psychoanalysis to be thriving as for many years, and this is really moving forward very well. In other countries, such as in Peru, also, although not the main theory, but it's one of the aspects, at least in the form of psychodynamic therapy, that is widely considered as an important element for the good training of mental health professionals.
Okay, all right. Okay. We're often asked for references, so if you have some suggestions for books or articles to read, if you'll send that to us, we'll be happy to send it to all of our participants today. I want to thank you both for this very interesting and lively discussion today. Dr. Mezzich, was there anything you wanted to say in closing?
Well, I guess we could end as native Peruvians still say when they say goodbye, namely tupan nanchis kama. Okay. Until life give us another opportunity to see each other. Thank you.
That's very beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. And so to our audience, thank you for joining us today. For your friends who missed this session or any of our previous events, you will find them on our Institute's YouTube channel. Also, we hope that you'll return and join us on June 12th. Our guest will be Marco Posadas. Our topic will be Mexico, and our moderator will be Dr. Anton Hart. So in the meantime, we hope to see you all again as we continue our series on confronting racism, discrimination, and othering perspectives from around the world. And in the meantime, please be safe and be well. Thank you.
Thank you.